Good evening, everybody, and welcome to this Temple Bar Trust Pathfinders lecture, where we're showcasing and celebrating architects and urban designers who are exploring issues of identity and meaning in their work. And we place a focus on practitioners' engagement of diverse communities, narratives, and languages, looking at resilient and equitable cultural drivers for placemaking for London in the 21st century, as we transition through the COVID crisis. So before I present our speaker for tonight, I'll just say a little bit about the Temple Bar Trust. I'm sure many of you out there know about it, but the Temple Bar Trust is a charity which has been set up to create the home for the Worshipful Company of Chartered Architects, a place where the company can hold its court meetings, can have dining facilities, and all sorts of access to a Sir Christopher Wren building. I mean, what better place for the Worshipful Company of Chartered Architects to have than its own Christopher Wren building? The signing of the lease has been delayed because of COVID-19, but as soon as things get back to normal, as we hope they will soon, we will occupy the building. We'll be doing it up a bit, but then it will be available for the company for use, but also for our educational program, which will include lectures and tours and ways of telling people more about the City of London and its architecture. And one of the reasons that we're doing these talks while we're unable to meet physically together is to show that the Temple Bar Trust is a very active organization. We have a lot of educational ideas which we want to deliver physically when the time is right, but at the moment we have to do it virtually like this. So welcome, and a particular welcome to our speaker tonight, Sumita Singha. She's founder of Ecologic Architects. Sumita is also an artist, author, and academic, and an RIBA presidential candidate. She's also author of the book Autotelic Architect, about self-initiated projects, greater collaboration and design activism. And very pleased to say that I wrote the preface to that book, but I also say I did have to actually look up autotelic before I wrote it, and so now I'm much better informed about what that word means, and it's very interesting idea about how architects can expand their horizons, and that's what we're going to hear about tonight, really. So thank you all for attending, and thank you very much for Sumita for coming or joining us tonight. So over to you.
Thank you, Peter, for the introduction. So we are actually going to travel quite far around the planet tonight, being in London, and we'll come back to London as we speak. So I'm going to talk about the projects I've done with my charity tonight. Okay, so the first thing I want to say is I believe that architecture has a social function, and that embeds itself in the way the community is engaged and empowered through the act of physical interventions. These interventions can connect personal health, environmental, and economic sustainability. This global vision is the Heavenly Eye, which is the lecture about. Charushila is the name of the charity I started in 2010, 10 years ago, to formally work on to transform underused spaces into community spaces with the help of local people, businesses, and in particular, children. Charushila is a Sanskrit word that means beautiful foundations. It was also the name of my grandmother, in whose name my father wanted to do some societal good. Thus, it appeared to be the perfect name for the charity. As a starting point, we took on the concept of value creation, which was first defined by the Japanese teacher and philosopher Tsunosaburo Makiguchi, and is now used in many areas of design and marketing and teaching. Makiguchi was a proponent of learning outside the school in activities and societies engaged in some practical efforts. The idea for this charity had germinated after I came to live in the UK and realized that the kind of work I really wanted to do didn't exist. So I had to create that. For many years, I carried on with the usual stuff that most architects do: houses, extensions, offices, healthcare, or community facilities. While working on these spaces and projects, I began to see the spaces that existed outside the formal or designed spaces. These spaces existed just outside, and so they belonged to no one. Sometimes open to all, and sometimes gated to keep out trespassers, criminals, or rubbish tippers. Often to be found in urban areas, there were spaces that belonged to no one, and visually, socially, and spatially, they impacted on the community. These were the liminal spaces. In anthropology, liminality, from the Latin word limen, means a threshold, and it defines a quality or ambiguity that occurs in the middle of the rite of passage. Architecturally, these spaces occur before entering a formal or private space from a public one. In a liminal space, identity, time, or community or a new way is established. Hence, these spaces cause discomfort because you're moving from one kind of social space to another. These spaces are visible, yet invisible. It could be a disused or underused space with the potential to turn into a valuable community space. I had also done similar community projects with the Crafts Council and other organizations before I started my charity. So we based our work on design from making and not exactly design from drawing. While the end goal is that of something that's been designed, the two different pathways can create different solutions. We use children to generate ideas by drawing while building directly without technical drawings. Our projects had to have three ingredients, which were the foundation from President Makiguchi's work, which was virtue or goodness, one or more aspects of sustainability, whether it was about recycling, zero waste, or the use of natural materials or nature. As we are a facilitating charity, not a funding charity, materials and funding had to come from somewhere else. Materials were either donated, found, or repurposed. The second benefit, we had to have this in place that the project must bring some practical benefit to the community. And for this, we took on food security in the form of kitchen gardens. Food security, an issue dear to my heart, coming from a land that has suffered one of the worst famines of the 20th century, the Bengal famine, in which 3 million people died. And finally, beauty. The project must use human talents and nature to create beauty, and so we encouraged local artists to participate in our work. We also use children's creativity and art in our projects. The idea that children can be powerful agents of change comes from Makiguchi's work and also from Professor Robert Chambers. Children often come with an agenda, and that's why we have used children to generate creative ideas. One of the rules or limitations the charity imposed on its work was that projects or even ideas weren't to be transposed from the outside. This had two effects on us. Projects took a long time to germinate because we wanted everything done with debate and discussion. And secondly, the architect took a back seat. Often in the projects, my own design offerings have been changed or removed completely, and that's fine. The architect's ego has to take a back seat in such community design. As this slide shows, this is a workshop I'd arranged at London Metropolitan University, where I was teaching at that point. It shows Professor Chambers demonstrating how our perspective changes when we look from the ground up, probably from a child's level. So our first test project was in Venezuela. for personal reasons and connections I'd made during a previous visit where I'd taken my students there. This was a country I'd fallen seriously ill in and also fallen seriously in love with. So I decided the first ever project should begin there. The project was undertaken with a community group based in the barrios of St. Augustine in Caracas. The aim was to create a community garden from an area of wasteland. The community called the garden El Shanti, from the Sanskrit word meaning peace, Shanti. The overall project being a long-term community unity and peace. To get the project going, we worked virtually with an artist and the community, trading ideas and finding funding. We looked at sites and found that one of them fitted our criteria. The site was located in an area cleared for the construction of the local Metrocable, the ski car transport system. Over time, the site had become overgrown and was used for criminal activities. The community wanted to regain this space for their own purpose. Clearing the overgrowth, we were joined by community gardeners and biologists who identified rare species of plant that we left in place while building. Superstitious beliefs that wild plants caused harm was discussed with the community by the gardeners. And here in the photo, you see one of the community gardeners working with local children. And you can also see a picture of the site where we were working. Due to the Metrocable company not allowing waste to be carried in the ski cars, we were forced to create a zero waste project. So what we did was we found all the demolition waste and wrapped it in chicken wire mesh, and we called it the rubble tortilla. I was amazed by the community spirit in which children and local people joined in, despite those working for the Metrocable being on strike and not having money coming in. At the end, we had good discussion session where, besides other things, there was much clearing of the air over who had not contributed their fair share of work. Through this first project, we made many mistakes, but we also learned many valuable lessons on community engagement, how to make sure everyone felt valued and contributed, how to implement children's contributions and ideas, how to work with the site and society. This was a particularly difficult site, being on a sloping site. And obviously we had to deal with the criminal people as well who were trying to stop what we were doing. But we learned a lot. And also I learned how not to raise money. Sorry, I've got a bit of problem here with my thing. We learned how not to raise money. And that was not to take online payment and not to do pub quiz. Techniques learned from the farm was also inspired by the inner city food growing in neighboring Cuba. So on the top, you can see a farm which is in the middle of Caracas, but it's grown by Cuban farmers. So next, we went to Palestinian territories, which is just outside Ramallah. And the Palestinian project was organized in the urban area of Al-Bira, which is a twin city of Ramallah on the West Bank. The project team was approached by local organizations, Omar El-Ard, which stands for Revivers of the Land of Palestine, and Amid East, an NGO supported by the US. Both are involved in delivering environmental education towards a clean and healthy Palestine. Another organization, the Dahlia Foundation, was advocating for the rights of Palestinians to control their own resources and sustain their own development for future generations. The local organizations and volunteers from the municipality and an environmental student group from Birzeit University all expressed their wish to create a green and sustainable Palestine. Access to fresh food is a major challenge in Palestine for many reasons. Agricultural land appropriation by Israeli occupation is a political cause for the loss of food growing. Recycling is also non-existent as it was in Venezuela. There was a conversation around these issues with both adults and children. I carried out a workshop in a refugee camp and also another one for children in which they created pictures of sustainable Palestine. So on the left, you see a young woman. She's just created something out of a bottle, which she'd brought for the workshop. And we also had a conversation about recycling at that same point. I was amazed to find people coming with sacks of clean plastic bottles because people don't drink alcohol, but they have a lot of fizzy drinks. So in that spaces that we took on, we cleared them by hand initially, and we were doing that for 3 days until the local council took pity on us, and they lent us a truck with a mechanical claw, and it was cleared up more easily. So we even found a dead dog in it after that. But eventually it was so nice to see the children playing, as you see in the center photo, after the land was cleared. And obviously it was very hard to find building materials here and then even in Venezuela. So what we decided to do was we found tires, we found sand, we found, I think there was just a sack of cement we found, and we found lots of rubble. And we even received a sack full of donated plastic bottle tops. So we decided to create a garden out of that. So one of the boys, he found plants that were going to be thrown out. So we used those and we planted those inside plastic bottles and tires. And you can see the whole community turned up. Eventually, we had about 200 people working on that side. It was very difficult to keep track of who was doing what, but we were running around the entire place trying to do things. We also repurposed an old sofa that we found under the tree to create a study space for children who lacked those. So you can see some of the spaces we created using tires. And we also had open spaces for people, children to play with. And we had little shady areas, as you can see on the left, made of bottles and bottle tops. After I left, the council then declared the space to be of community value, and it's now got like signs saying that this is a community space. We also created another space which could be used as a bus stop, and then I received an award from the local council for my work. On the back of this project, the local organizations then carried out more than 100 environmental projects in schools and community spaces. And on the left, you can see a local artist working with children to create drawings about sustainability. And then we received all this, the information about work that the local organizations that I mentioned before had carried out. And they're obviously working with the ideas we'd given them. So there's before and after pictures were taken by them, and they shared it with me. So we also did a workshop with children and a lecture for activists working in the remote Ladakh region of India. And that was probably the highest place I've ever done a lecture in. I think it's 35,000 feet above sea level. You have to catch your breath while doing a lecture in that area. But these kids were really cheerful, and we had great fun. So the kids had destroyed this a solar panel in this school, which was built by Arabs. And so the whole conversation started about how we could create sustainable Ladakh. And this was a bit surprising because considering that Tibetan Buddhism is about sustainability, I wondered why these kids were actually bent on destroying a solar panel. And so the conversation then turned about spirituality and going back to Buddhism. And I think they understood that destroying a solar panel wouldn't help them to get electricity in this very remote part of the Himalayas. So then we come to London. And in the UK, we have worked in EALING, HOXTON, and ACTON. So what we found that apart from, we think that social inequality exists in poor countries, but we found that there are huge differences in life expectancy between the rich and the poor, with the better off living longer. The tragic fire in the Grenfell estate in 2017 revealed a 16-year difference in the life expectancies from one street to another. Economic access to healthy food is a major factor, even in London. Obesity levels are on the rise, with more fizzy drinks and junk food being consumed in poorer areas of London. Thus, London also provides a setting for our work, even though it might seem very far removed from the conditions in Venezuela and Palestine. So this is our EALING project. And the EALING project entailed the creation of a wild space, because parents told us that they miss the wild spaces in London. Everything is cultivated and sanitized. A local sculptor and an artist were involved in the consultation and the work. We worked with EALING Transition Group, which is a local group there, running 2 workshops and a building picnic in which parents and children came with a picnic, and also created wild space with seating. And you can see on the right some of the seating we created. And on the left, you can see a painting workshop organized for children. And in the middle is a consultation we did with parents after we got ideas from the children. So now we come to HOXTON. In HOXTON, we worked on a public space in an area of 1,200 square meters behind a residential block in a low-income area of HOXTON. This area of East London has a long history of settlement by immigrant communities, largely due to good transport connections by rail and canal, and culturally very diverse. It's also now on the overground circuit. Charushila carried out an initial needs assessment with residents, local businesses, local organizations, and community groups. The aim was to establish who the users of the space were that we were going to work on, and what their needs were, and generate ideas on how it could be transformed into more inviting public space for the benefit of the whole community. So this was basically, if you look at one of the pictures, this was basically a green area with nothing happening in it. So what we wanted to do was to transform that space into a more usable space. So we started in 2013, and it was part of a wider everyday canal side project, which was funded by the Metropolitan Housing Trust, which owns the housing block behind it. Charushila's project partners were Counterpoint Arts, which supports and produces arts by and about migrants and refugees, and Shoreditch Trust, which aims to improve the health, well-being, social networks, and opportunities of youth in the local area. Quantitative data from the survey was recorded to ensure an inclusive approach. Other participants included local businesses, shops, and restaurants. Information was provided in English, Turkish, and Vietnamese, which were the 3 major languages spoken in that housing estate. Charushila's methodological focus was on the aspects of goodness or virtue, benefit, and beauty throughout the participatory engagement and design phases. The community consultations were held in conjunction with a photographic project by photographer Marcia Chandra entitled Humans of Canalside, through which a community photo booth and individual interviews gave a snapshot of local people's stories depicting the rich migration history of the area and its diversity. Charushila's volunteers spent a long time in the local area meeting and talking with residents informally as well as in planned meetings. Around 60 local people took part, including children from the adjacent school. So on the left, you can see the photographic project, which was basically we interviewed people in the photo booth, and then these were printed out straight away. And these depicted people standing in their place and talking about the aspirations for the local, for that space. And then you see the bits of ceramic earthenware that we found with the local workshop that we used in the various schemes that you'll see in a minute. And this gentleman, I photographed him because he was looking incredibly well dressed to do any gardening work, but he managed to do everything without spoiling his clothes. So local residents had cited a lack of participation in decision-making in the development and use of this open space, which had become neglected and was attracting antisocial behavior. The space was mainly used to exercise dogs. There was an existing outdoor gym, which was underused. Residents expressed their wish to have a safe space to sit and relax, with an area dedicated to growing food. Although there was a fresh food market in the neighborhood, the major O'Brien Court residents, which was the name of this housing, were in their over 50s age group and had limited mobility. So having their own garden with fresh produce was seen as a huge benefit. In June 2014, the year after, a community day was organized with creative workshops on how to grow food by St. Mary's Secret Garden, which is a local community garden charity, which works with vulnerable adults and those affected by long-term health conditions. Turning Earth, which is the local pottery studio I mentioned before, did a workshop on plant pot making, and we invited people to note down their ideas for the garden. All the ideas that were generated were incorporated into a series of drawings by Charushila and displayed in the foyer of the housing estate, with volunteers standing by and taking notes from people whose English was poor. Information was also provided in English, Turkish, and Vietnamese, and also boxes left to give feedback. Posters were put up around the local area to give updates and signpost people to the relevant contacts and websites. After amendments to the design and further discussion with users, the second phase took place in the first 3 months of 2015. This part was carried out by Charushila with St. Mary's Secret Garden, Brownwork Trust, and Garrett Shields, a local sculptor. Following research into the local history of the area, we found an old map that showed that Bryan Court Gardens had been constructed on the site of a row of terraced houses and a public house which had been destroyed during the Second World War. The initial garden design lined up the pathways and seating with the foundations of the building, using the old map as an underlay. But however, due to the incline of the land, this design couldn't be used. And that's one of the things we found out with such work, is that often you have to change those designs. However, the raised beds were aligned to the original scheme as much as possible, and as well as with the outdoor gym being there. The raised beds were constructed by local people through St. Mary's Secret Garden, and the seating was built using reclaimed materials left over from the Chelsea flower show, and included broken pottery from the local ceramic studio, Turning Earth. So here you see a slide where we have got a zoomed version of the seat, and the local people who came, they were trained in stone carving. And you can also see the seat, which was created from the leftovers of the Chelsea flower show. And here are the people who constructed the planter beds. And these are people with mental and health difficulties who came to help us. And also at the bottom right, you see a greenhouse that was then borrowed by the community and used for growing plants during the winter months. And the community also trained others in food growing, and the garden has expanded physically. The project also had an effect of reducing crime and vandalism, helped by the installation of a new CCTV camera. The community has secured funding and help in kind from the Housing Association and local groups to maintain and enhance the garden and undertake other projects. Thanks to the seeds or cuttings from the plants they received at the beginning of the project, food production is a continuing process during each season. Residents are now training others in food growing by holding workshops with the Canal Side Residents Group. So now we come to the other side, which is ACTON. But I just also wanted to put in here that Charushila is part of awareness raising as well. So we organized a talk in the summer of 2016 for the London Festival of Architecture, which attracted a international audience who came to learn about the benefits of community gardening and visited the Bryant Court Garden. Local people have been engaged in this exercise for some time now, and we wanted to see what effect it would have on businesses. So that was one aspect we hadn't looked at. The other thing we had learned from this project was about using non-denominational and natural images as a way of integrating art into an everyday act of relaxing, with the garden encapsulating the attributes of beauty, benefit, and good. So this recent project in ACTON, which is the one we're working on now, is a new container kitchen garden, which opened up on the station platform in the Acton Central Station. So it's basically on the same line in 2018. It has involved Charushila working again with Groundwork London and new partners Energy Gardens, TfL and RIBA, the train companies. Local community consultation with about 200 people included local businesses, station staff and companies, as well as passengers who were alighting or getting into to board the trains. So this particular slide shows a stone plaque that became a centerpiece of the project. It was erected in the memory of a popular staff member who had died suddenly. In its message of hope embodied in "Winter always turns to spring," it has become popular with passengers who wait on the platform, and also has been featured on radio. So on the left, you see the day when this project was inaugurated by the local MP. The building work was completed by the environmental charities, Energy Gardens and Groundwork London. And it was based on the results of the consultation carried out by Charushila. The planting was done by local staff, local volunteers, and Charushila. And we were also trained in gardening by Energy Gardens. So local businesses provided food and drinks for the launch. Local children and teachers have been coming to ensure that the garden is maintained. They work together with station staff because strict safety rules have to be followed on a station platform. This project encouraged people to take away plants. So it was different from the other project in the sense that we were actually giving away plants and food to people we didn't know and who didn't actually belong to a particular estate here, people coming in and out and local businesses. The aim was we put up signs saying that please take as much as you want, but leave some for the others as well. We also aimed to use hardy plants that would grow without much help. And this was a lesson we had learned in Palestine, where we had to find plants that didn't need much watering. So we used herbs such as rosemary and sage, and these were also popular with people and passengers. Spinach also was a good plant that we grew. Flowers were also meant to be taken and used. And these two slides on the right show pumpkin flowers that would have gone to waste. So I brought them back to make fritters, and I shared the recipe online. So people would know how not to waste food. So as I said before, we've also been running training and awareness workshops and lectures. So some of these were held on site as we worked with people, and some were held in more formal settings, such as the RIBA and at universities. And our work has been published in a formal research journal and also in a book. You see on the right, there's a workshop at London Met, which I did with the students there. And on the right is a lecture at the RIBA bookshop. So what are the lessons that we have learned? So some are obvious, that community and food growing and enhanced food knowledge can contribute to greater food security and better nutrition. And then children and older people can be part of that process. Environmental, cultural, and social values relating to food growing can be enhanced through the involvement of artists and architects. These seem to be quite obvious. But more than that, this kind of work shows that despite working with very little money, community action can be a powerful action for change. It can work across borders, whether in Caracas or Kolkata, whether in London or Ladakh. The invisible hand is a concept that has become popular to describe social mobility through income distribution. However, as we see, economic inequalities and the consequent social and spatial inequalities have continued, despite the wealth of the wealthiest increasing. The climate and COVID crisis have laid bare these fault lines. The invisible has been made visible. Is value only in things that are big or cost a lot, or can we find value in other ways? The heavenly eye that connects the local to the global is really the invisible bond that creates value and makes such work visible. Thank you very much for listening to me.
Well, thank you very much, Sumita. And now I would just say to everyone in the audience that there is a chat bar that you can click and put your questions to Sumita to ask her about a talk or other things you might like to ask her about. But I'll just start off, Sumita, that you started off by saying architecture is a social function and architecture should take a back seat. Certainly the second seems to be not characteristic, you might say, of the architect profession generally. And I'm wondering how much buy-in do you have from the profession in terms of, are architects there to solve problems about food security or financial inequality, those sort of things? I mean, why should, you might say, architects take on those roles?
Well, one of the tools I found very useful was looking at the Sustainable Development Goals from the UN. And that looks at various characteristics. I think there are 17 of those. And when you look at it, you think, what's that got to do with architecture? Health or water provision or something like that. But actually, if you look at the way the city functions, we need water supply, we need food. So, all that is really connected with providing architecture. And you could say that all architects have to work in amongst those 17 criteria in order to actually build properly, to create something that is useful for the community. And I mean, when I say the architects have to take a back seat in these kind of projects, you can't, you can't hold on to your ideas. You have to give those away, and sometimes you have to let people take, precedence over what you think and what you do, because people feel empowered by doing that. And when I mentioned the project in Ladakh, where the kids were throwing stones at these very expensive solar panels, they didn't understand what solar panels do, and they just saw this black thing and they were just chucking things at it. And it's very expensive to carry stuff there. It's there's tiny planes that go up there. So it was an incredible waste of effort and money to have done that. But when people are actually explained, this is what happens, and this, this is generating electricity for you, or this is helping you in some ways, and they feel empowered to actually say something about the design, then they feel engaged in it. And I think things are changing. The RIBA, for example, the RIBA Journal, runs this McEwen Award that looks at socially responsible projects. And so I think the sort of idea about what architecture is changing.
And yeah, as I said in your introduction, you stood as a presidential candidate for the RIBA. So that would have been one of your messages to the profession? They've got to get out there more, would it?
Absolutely. I think we need to get out there. And I think the COVID epidemic or pandemic has shown that, people are using spaces in different ways, that life has changed. And as we were talking beforehand, that the new normal has become normal. And so how can we just engage? People, I mean, even I work also as in healthcare. I'm a non-exec in an NHS trust. And there's huge mistrust, for example, about the vaccine. There was mistrust about wearing a mask and so on and so forth. But I felt that there was lack of engagement in that. So I think more people are engaged in having a say in what they want to do. We have better buy-ins with that. So certainly that was one of my messages and still is.
Now, we do have a question in the chat that says, what lessons can we learn from your experiences of public consultation in other countries for your work, for our work with communities in the UK? So what have you learned from places?
Okay, so one of the big things was that in Venezuela and Palestine, we saw huge enthusiasm for doing such work. These are two places where, there's very little resources, very little money available. And I think I mentioned that the people in Venezuela, the women that were working on the project, they were on strike, so they weren't getting their weekly wages. So at that point, they decided to come and help us because they felt a sense of community. We found a great reluctance in London for communities to engage. It took ages for us to get the project in HOXTON started, and also in all the London projects took ages, whereas the projects abroad were pretty quick compared to what we did in London. So that was one of the lessons that, perhaps we live a very privileged life where things are done for us. So we don't try to engage, we don't try to be involved in issues. But I think there is power then. And I think the COVID crisis and also climate crisis has shown that we need to actually be engaged a bit more with our built environment.
So I'm interested how you involve communities in that, because I mean, you and I both live in West London, and your local MP, looks from the photograph, is Rupa Haq, who has taken a great stand against the street space project created by the Mayor of London, ways of delivering more walking and cycling, and there has been a huge resistance to changes to the way the city works from people like Rupa, but also the constituents in West London. Now, those are positive changes which were seen to be healthy, would have created healthier ways of getting around town, and were emergencies in the light of the COVID-19 catastrophe. So, where Rupa is involving the local community, they are being what I would call totally reactionary.
Yes, I know. We also had problems with the low transport networks zones, and there's been a huge resistance in our local area with that. Well, I personally don't see anything wrong with that. And initially, actually, I noticed that during the lockdown and when the pandemic was in the early days of the pandemic, more people were cycling, more people were walking, and I think we have got used to the car. And I know in places like Chiswick, they have blocked off areas. They're constructing cycle lanes. Cycling's not been very safe so far. So people feel a bit afraid of cycling. And once these cycling lanes are constructed and people get used to it, I think having a change takes a long time, doesn't it? We didn't have cars, and now for I don't know, decades, people have got used to having one car, two cars, whatever. And now we're saying, well, don't use cars. let's cycle, let's walk. But I think the turning point could be this case by this mother whose daughter died of asthma. And this case is going to be held, I think, this week or next week. It's coming on. And this brave lady took on, a whole lot of people and said, my child died because of pollution. And nobody had said that before. Nobody has raised this before. So I think we're at this turning point. And of course, COVID is spread by poor health, poor lung health. COVID attacks people with poor lung health. So people are beginning to be mindful that, you can't live with pollution. It's going to kill you.
Yes, well, yes, hopefully we'll see change. And to a certain extent, it's very interesting to see that the government today has been pushed to accept a whole green industrial revolution, really, which is, I think, accelerated very much by COVID-19, but also, of course, by having the COP conference up in Glasgow next year, which is going to be a major event for the UK. And hopefully that will shift a lot of attitudes.
Absolutely.
Good. Well, we don't seem to be having any more questions in the chat box, so I think we'll leave it there, and or leave it to me to just thank you very much, Sumita, for attending this Zoom event this evening, telling us about your work. It's really interesting to see the variety of work that architects do. We have more formal architectural presentations in these events, and to see somebody sort of changing the role of the architect like that is very interesting and very inspiring. So thank you very much indeed.
Thank you, Peter, for having me.
And thank you.